Hey, good evening, church. It's good to see you guys, and I hope you all are doing well as we continue to navigate this unique time with this coronavirus and how it's affecting us and our families and our friends. I pray that you are doing well and that you're keeping your eyes set on God. And if you're jumping in onto this live stream for the first time, we want to welcome you in and say thank you for joining us. And we hope, again, that we can connect with you, get to know you, and share our lives together throughout this time and beyond. The future is bright. We know that God holds it in his hands. Even though sometimes things are confusing and uncertain, we know that our God is certain. At CrossWay, we believe that Jesus Christ is our Lord and our Savior. We are trying to follow him as best as we can, and we're trying to do that together as a family. We need the support system of the church. We're so thankful that God gave it to us, and I think even in these times, we're becoming more and more aware of how much we need the body. At least I am. I've been really challenged and encouraged by my need for relationships and connecting with people. I found that when I'm jumping on phone calls or Zoom calls or just spending time with brothers and fellowshipping with the sisters and brothers in our campus ministry here, it brings just a breath of fresh air for me. Something that I need to cherish and continue to cherish. And even the times I've got to have dinner with brothers and sisters in the church over Zoom, such a new experience, but I'm very thankful for it. So I hope that you're doing well. I want to welcome you to our live stream tonight. Keep in mind that right after this at 7 p.m., we are having a marriage and parenting class, which is phenomenal. Please tune into that. Chris and Allison Stowers, who are great brothers and sisters in the church, they are just phenomenal when it comes to sharing their lives and teaching us very practical things about raising kids and even being strong married couples. So please stick around for that and let your friends know about it as well. Tonight, we're continuing our character study, and for the next few weeks, we're going to focus on Jesus. I'm calling it Portraits of Jesus. It's not a new name. I'm sure you've heard that before. But tonight, we're going to be talking about who is Jesus and why does this matter? And you know, Jesus is arguably the most famous person in human history. I'm sure you've heard about him at the very least, and those of us who worship together, we're very familiar with him and his teachings. But who is he really? Right? Who's he really? I remember when I was at a wedding in Spain a couple years ago, I was helping out behind the scenes, just washing dishes, trying to help take some of the pressure off of the bride and the groom and the groomsmen and the bridesmaids. And me and my wife, we brought some Tupperware from the place that we were staying to the venue. And I was back there. I left the Tupperware there. Didn't think twice about it. It was just washing dishes, kind of back and forth. And when I went back in there to get the Tupperware, the person who was hosting the venue accused me of being a thief. They thought that I was stealing their Tupperware, even though it was the Tupperware that I brought with me. And man, first of all, I didn't understand what they were saying. I'm pretty okay with speaking Spanish. This is my second language. I'm not fluent. I can understand most things, but certain sort of nuances I can't pick up on. And luckily, another friend was there who was fluent, and she was able to articulate to me in English, like, hey, they're saying that you're stealing that. They're accusing you of being a thief. And I was taken aback. I was like, whoa, what? Like, this is the Tupperware that I brought, is what's going through my mind. And just looking at their face and looking at the confusion and just realizing the situation, I decided, you know what? Let me just let this one go. First of all, it's never fun being accused of being something that you're not. But I'm thinking to myself, why in the world would I come all the way to Madrid to steal Tupperware? Like, there's lots of other things. If you wanted to steal something, it wouldn't be Tupperware. But anyway, I mean, just the audacity and the confusion. And it hit me that, you know, they didn't know me. This person didn't know me. They had no experience with me. All they knew about me was based on their preconceived notions and what those preconceived notions told them about me, which was most likely based upon what they associated me with, what I looked like, or past experience they had. Sometimes we do that with God. Sometimes we take our preconceived notions, the things we heard about him, the things people said about him, and then we write a story about him and what he is and who he is and why he does what he does. And sometimes we accuse him and we blame him and we pin things on him instead of just listening and reading the book he wrote about himself. It could have been a whole different situation for me if the person just would have asked me if that was mine. But there was those assumptions there, that preset, assumed, preconceived notion that was their first reaction. And sometimes we do that with God. We hear things from people. We write him off. We convince ourselves of who he is based off of what other people say about him or what we think is true about him based off of our past experiences. But we don't necessarily take the time to examine the scriptures, to study, to work through patiently, to learn and understand what he says about himself. Do you like it when someone accuses you of something based off of what someone else has to say? No, none of us like this. None of us like being accused. I definitely didn't enjoy being accused of being a thief at Tupperware. Come on, right? But again, just realizing this person didn't know me. But we don't like it when someone speaks on our behalf about who we really are, but they don't really know who we are. When we're falsely accused or someone misunderstands, right? Or there's just inaccurate information about us that's being spread as if it's true, right? That makes us angry because we know who we really are. We know what we stand for. We know what we believe. We know what we've done. But yet some people have ideas about us that are false. And sometimes we have false ideas about God. Let me ask you a quick question. So as you think about Jesus, as we're talking about Jesus, how much of what you know about Jesus is based off of what you've read from the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and from the New Testament? Think about that for just a second. I'll ask it again. How much of what you know about Jesus is based off of what you've read and studied for yourself from the Bible, Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, aka, or the New Testament? How much of what you know about him is based off of just what you heard from some preacher like me, or you heard somebody say about him, but you haven't gone back and you haven't actually taken the time to read and study for yourself? Sometimes we can be guilty of this. We just run with what's easier. Sometimes it's easier just to accumulate data on something we don't feel like we have the time to look into, right? Well, we all have the time now, and I want to encourage you with this time. Don't let this time of everything slowing down prevent you from focusing in on Christ, for reading and studying about him, talking about him, getting to know him. I spent a large portion of last night just reading a Wikipedia article about Jesus because I wanted to know what was just out there about him. And to my surprise, pretty accurate information is about Jesus on Wikipedia. So even if a person just wanted to just read a Wikipedia article on Jesus, they wouldn't get that much inaccurate information, which is a little comforting to know, like, hey, if I don't know where to start, oh, let me check Wikipedia. You might actually get somewhere. But I would encourage you, obviously don't don't base everything about Jesus off of Wikipedia. Read the Bible. Go to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, Genesis to Malachi, right? Read it, get to know him. And this is precisely why I wanted to spend these next few weeks really examining Jesus, really looking at these portraits of Jesus and talking about him from what the Bible, from what his word has to say. You know, it's nothing like somebody listening to you explain yourself. When you are in a situation, when I was accused, or when you're accused, or someone misinterprets what you're saying, or they don't understand you, when a person just shifts from defending themselves to trying to understand you, your guard drops, right? Because which of us, how many of us don't want to be understood by someone else? I mean, we all want to be understood. We all want to be listened to and connected to. We want people to understand our hearts. We even want to understand our own hearts. Imagine approaching Jesus this way, approaching the Bible this way. Instead of accusing him, instead of writing him off, instead of putting him in a box, instead of ignoring him, would we just adopt the posture of trying to understand who he is, right? I've got one goal with these series of classes. My goal simply is to show you Jesus. That's my goal, is to show you Jesus in the Bible. Because I believe that Jesus is powerful, Jesus is loving, Jesus is compelling, Jesus is interesting enough to move you if you see him based off of what he says about himself. I think that if you see Jesus, it will move you to make a decision about whether you want to follow him or keep following him, or whether you don't want to follow him. My goal is just to show you him. It's up to you what you do after that. I believe that once you see him, you'll be moved. So let's get started. Within the origins of human history, we know this. Different people have been elected to rule and lead others, and different people have been set apart by God. Yahweh is the name of the God of the Hebrew Bible. He's the God that the Israelites believe in, the God that us as Christians believe in. He's called Yahweh. That's his name. So, for example, Abraham Lincoln, 16th president of the United States, chosen by the people to become president. He was the first Republican to win the presidency. Yesterday, April 14th, was an important day in history. Back in 1865, April 14th, President Lincoln was assassinated. Right? We've read this. We know this. His assassination was horrible. I mean, any assassination, I don't want anybody to be killed, but this happened to him. Some people were sad. Some people weren't sad. But it's kind of crazy that, we forget that even though we chose him as president, some people still didn't want him to be president. Some people they had their own plans, their own agendas, their own ideas of what they wanted, and they adopted decisions. And in this case, to take a person's life, a person that the people chose to rule and to lead, they wanted to end his life. And they did, unfortunately. They assassinated Abraham Lincoln. 1865, April 14th. That was just yesterday, many years ago, but a powerful day in history. But we chose President Lincoln, right? He's one of the best presidents in U.S. history. Not perfect, who is, right? But we remember him for some of the decisions he made. We visit his memorial up in D.C. to go look at it, to read it, to connect with some of our history. An important figure in American history, chosen by people. Let's look at the biblical example of someone chosen by God. And this is in Exodus chapter 3. This is Moses. And just to give you an example of being chosen, because we're going to talk about an important aspect of Jesus' life here in just a second. So in Exodus chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 1 and we're going to go down to verse 10. So Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. This is after Moses was in Egypt, after he left Egypt because he killed a Hebrew. He left out of fear that he was going to be killed. So he left, he got married, he became a son-in-law to Jethro. In verse 1, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight. Why does the bush not burn up? It's a good question. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him from within the bush. Moses, Moses. You can imagine hearing your name come from a bush had to be a very confusing, very exhilarating, very weird experience. Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. The Hebrews at this time, if you're unfamiliar with Israelite history or this part of the Bible, they were in slavery, enslaved to Pharaoh. He was a very harsh ruler. He abused them. He overworked them. It was abusive, oppressive slavery. So God sees this, and this is what he's saying in verse 8. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, basically cows and bees and just things that you can use to grow and eat and have a prosperous time. The home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, different people groups. Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So we see, just like the people chose Abraham Lincoln to become president, and it's a little bit different, of course, but God is literally choosing Moses to go and lead and set his people free. he is sending Moses into Egypt to lead them, to speak on his behalf to Pharaoh, on behalf of the Israelites, so that they can be set free and moved out of slavery. And we know for sure that this happens as you continue to read the story of Exodus. We see the plagues. We see that eventually the Israelites are moved through the Red Sea and set free from the rule of Egypt. And from that point on in Israel's history, they wandered through the desert. It's supposed to take a couple of weeks, but they make a lot of mistakes. So it takes them 40 years. It's a long time, right? 40 years is a long time to do anything. And they're wandering in the desert generations. A generation of them pass away, a new generation is raised up, so on and so forth. But all throughout this time, God is using Moses to lead his people. He chose him. And this idea of being chosen is really important. There's this word in the Bible called anointed. It means to be chosen. It means to literally, your oil is poured on your head, right? When you are chosen to, for example, become a king, you're anointed. God would send a prophet to anoint you, pour oil on your head, and you will be God's chosen person to lead and serve those people. And Moses is not anointed here, obviously, but Moses is chosen by God. And Moses ends up being a prophet for Israel, amongst many other prophets in their history. But there's a very key section here in Deuteronomy chapter 18 that I want to turn to so we can see what's happening here. The Israelite people were being led by Moses. And as their history goes, Moses eventually dies. So Deuteronomy 18:15, he's talking to them as they're getting ready to enter into the promised land. He's reminding them of their history, everything that they've been through, all the times that God has rescued them, been patient with them, so on and so forth. Through Deuteronomy 18:15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. This is Moses speaking. From among you, from your fellow Israelites, you must listen to him. For this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see his great fire anymore, or we will die. In their history, they heard from God directly. They were so scared. They were like, we don't want to hear from him anymore. You speak on behalf of him. He's scary. We'll die. They were, let us hear from you, right? So they want to hear from a human. And God grants them that wish. In verse 17, the Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up from them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. Wow. So traditional Jewish belief on this is that this meant that God was going to continue to raise up prophets for Israel. And that is absolutely true. He raised up prophet after prophet after prophet, right? Right after Moses, we have Joshua who leads them. After Joshua, we have a series of judges. After the judges, we have a series of kings. After the kings, we have a series of actual prophets who are trying to speak to those kings as they are ruling Israel. So we know that that's true. One interesting thing is that the reinterpretation that came around a little bit later from the Jewish perspective is that God was going to raise up a single messianic prophet at the end of time. Now, messianic is a fancy word. It just means Messiah. Messiah is attached to that word anointed. The person who is anointed, the person who's chosen. So their reinterpretation of this particular verse later on was God is going to raise up one chosen prophet, the Messiah, a messianic prophet at the end of time. So at this point in Israel's history, there's this expectation of a prophet coming after Moses. Moses is still alive right now. Turn over to Deuteronomy 34. And we see when Moses dies. There's an interesting line here that the writer of the book of Deuteronomy penned. And if you go to Deuteronomy 34, we start in verse 5. It says this, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died. He died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Interesting. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. Goals. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, back in Exodus, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to the whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the great, awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. So we have this interesting statement. Moses died, Joshua replaced him, but there still hasn't been a prophet like Moses yet, who performed all these great deeds, who spoke to God face to face. No one's ever shown this mighty power that Moses did. So tracking through Israel's history, certain Jews, the ones who wrote the Hebrew Bible, were anticipating a prophet. Now, whether that was multiple different prophets, I think the answer to that is yes. And as I mentioned later on, a single messianic prophet. So Moses is on the scene, and then Moses dies. And if you're anticipating another prophet, then you're thinking, okay, well, maybe it's Joshua next. Joshua is awesome. He meditates on God's word day and night. He keeps it in his mouth, and he leads the people well. And they're faithful throughout Joshua's leadership, which is phenomenal. But Joshua dies. And after Joshua, you have judges, and then you have kings, and you have all these different prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Amos, Obadiah. You have Elijah, who is very similar to Moses. They both have experiences on Mount Horeb. They both perform miracles. Elijah also was one of the first people in the Bible we see directly give, and besides Moses, he gives his spirit to Elisha, kind of this idea of discipleship. But Elijah and Moses both disappear. They have these weird, mysterious deaths. Elijah is caught up in a chariot of fire, which is awesome. And Moses is mysteriously buried by God. They both kind of just disappear. So this anticipation of, okay, well, who is the prophet? Is it, well, it's not Joshua, it's not Elijah. Who is it? And whoever they are, they will have to perform miracles because Moses did. They'll have to have mighty power because Moses did. They'll have to have the word in their mouth because Joshua did. They will meditate on it day and night. They have to have disciples or somebody who's following them because Elijah had Elisha, Moses had Joshua. So they'll speak face to face with God rather than having dreams and visions. But Joshua, Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, as you go through the different prophets, they died. Elijah and Moses are the only two who had this interesting experience. And then all of a sudden, later on in history, raised up in Galilee from Nazareth during the time of the Roman province, you get this little kid who's born in a manger. And somehow, this character in Luke chapter 2 named Simeon was at least one person who was looking for this prophet. And he has this interaction with Mary and Joseph. It just moves you to think, how and why was he looking for them? So in Luke chapter 2, verse 22, this section of scripture here, Mary and Joseph are at the temple and they're presenting the for their baby, And in verse 25, there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel. Interesting. And the Holy Spirit was on him. It has been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took up Jesus in his arms and praised God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all the nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel." Wait a minute. So Simeon somehow was able to recognize that Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus was his prophet that they were waiting for. Jesus was going to bring about the consolation of Israel and also be a light to the Gentile nations. Simeon was on to something. Even though Jesus was born humbly in a manger to Mary and Joseph, even though he was accused, as we'll see later on in his life, can anything good come from Nazareth? Which this idea of his birthplace wasn't even noble. The way he was born was questioned because he was born before Mary and Joseph had intimacy in their sexuality. So even that was a question of, well, was it infidelity? And even multiple times, as we'll see later on in his life too, his own family or his own people who knew him would just question, like, isn't this Mary and Joseph's little kid? Like, how can he say this? How can he say that? So Jesus comes on the scene, as Deuteronomy 18:15 says, raise up a prophet from your own people. Jesus grew up with them. He came from among them. And he ministered to them. But as we know, they really didn't accept him. But think about his life for a second. Is it a coincidence that he met on the mountain of transfiguration with Elijah and Moses? Is it a coincidence that he performed miracles, that the word of God was in his mouth, that he spoke with God directly, that God spoke about him directly? Is it a coincidence that he knew the scriptures very well, even at the age of 12? Is it a coincidence that even as he continued his ministry, as we know, we just celebrated Easter, some of us, that he ended up being killed by his own people? And he died. You know, those around him at that time who were getting to know him and following him thought that he will be the one who liberated them from Israel. Was Simeon wrong? Because Jesus was crucified by his own people. The chief priests were the ones who decided that he should be crucified. But those around him who followed him for those 3 years, they thought that he was going to set them free from Roman oppression. Turn over to Luke chapter 24 and we'll end here. Luke 24, verse 13. We'll look at the heart of the people once Jesus was killed to see how they were affected and moved emotionally. Now that same day, this is verse 13 of Luke 24, two of them, this is just followers of Jesus, were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened, Jesus' crucifixion and everything. As they talked and discussed things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. Interesting. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only visitor visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" "What things?" Jesus asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. Listen to what Cleopas says. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped. So at this point in Israel's history, the person who they thought was going to redeem Israel, the person who they thought was the Messiah, the person who they thought was the anointed one, the person who they thought was that prophet that they've been waiting for, they saw him die and they lost hope. At that point, he became just like Moses, just like Joshua, just like Elijah, just like Jeremiah, just like Isaiah, just like the kings, just like David. But on the third day, Jesus rose. He rose, and in rising, it became known that not only is he God, not only has he overcome death, not only is he alive, but he is the hero, the one who can overcome death. He actually is Messiah, the anointed one, the prophet to come. And he invites us to come and follow him into this new way of life that is really based upon God's original design. Jesus overcame the final fate of every human being. He died, and then he resurrected. Jesus is the Messiah. He is the one that Israel has been waiting for, and he is the one who gives us hope in this world today. So now you know a little bit more about him and who he is. And next week, we'll talk about why he came. So just to recap, what we went through, Deuteronomy, we also went through Exodus, just to talk about how God chose certain people. Similar to how we choose a president. God chose Moses. He chose Jesus. He chose different people in Israel's history to lead and to serve his people. Ultimately, God chose Jesus to be the Messiah, the anointed one, the Redeemer of Israel, the one who is the prophet that they've been waiting for and the healer of mankind. So next week we'll get to talk more about why he came, and we'll get to talk more about his life. And if you have any questions, or if you have thoughts or questions or ideas, or want to just talk, please drop a comment, send us a message on Facebook. I'm on Facebook too, Mitchell Lavender. You can message me, and I would love to chat with you guys. But until then, I hope again that this is encouraging. Remember, stay tuned for our marriage and parenting class right after this. And again, let's keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. If this is your first time hearing about him, I hope that this is helpful, that it continues to help you see just how amazing he really is and how he is the Messiah. He is the chosen one, the only person who overcame death, our final fate. He is our hero. And we'll be picking up next week to talk more about him. Until then, stay safe and enjoy your days. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Hope that you are doing incredible. And as we talked about Sunday, pray that you are being changed each day by the resurrection. I do want to give you a few announcements, just updates on prayers primarily. Um, and and then we're going to go on with the class. This is the marriage class, and we would love for you to be able to stick with us for the next couple months, as we're going to be doing this every Wednesday night. This class tonight won't be so interactive. That's why Allison isn't with me. But after that, each time we'll have interactive opportunities. Each class will have homework assigned with it, so that should be something really helpful for you. The homework for this week is already on Facebook, the CrossWay Facebook site. So don't chase after that right now, but it is on there, and you can look it up later and go over it with your spouse. That would be great for you. This isn't just for people who are married, but people who are seriously dating would also benefit a lot from that. Or if you just want to learn more about being a great husband and wife years ahead of time, you can pay attention to that as well. So we're happy to have anybody that wants to tune in with us. The prayers, again, Thomas Matthias, he went to get a biopsy this past week, I think yesterday, and so keep him in your prayers. His surgery is still scheduled for April 29th. We'll have a time schedule where we'll be fasting. We'll be praying for him for that day. Buck and Kay are watching us tonight, and please be praying for them. They continue to do well, although it's challenging things going on with their life, so please keep them in your prayers. And Dennis and Sharon update as they are doing much better, but still really tired. Keep them in your prayers as well. But thanks so much for serving them in so many ways. So we want to go ahead and get started tonight, and I want you to think about this. When you get married, what is the goal of your marriage? You think, oh man, I hope we just make it. You know, hopefully we can just hang on and make it through the years. And I don't think, in all the pre-marriage counseling that I've ever done, I don't feel like one couple has ever said that kind of mindset or had that kind of mindset starting out. But sometimes things happen. You start wondering, man, are we going to hang in there? Can we make it? And Satan is strongly opposed to you having a great marriage. And so you're going to have to fight for it. And that's what this class is about, is learning how to have the tools, have the heart, help each other to grow, help yourself to grow, so you can have a marriage that's incredible, that you will love, that will be a light to other people. So what's the long-term goal? Hopefully it's not just to make it. Hopefully it's not just to get by. But it requires continual growth. And a couple of things, I want to just give you some keys for this class tonight. We're going to talk a lot about love. We're going to talk a lot about love and God being the foundation in your marriage. We're going to talk about how important it is for each person to realize that they need to change. There's none of us that are perfect enough to make a perfect marriage. We need to grow. And each person needs to have that mindset, I'm going to continue to grow. And this includes every area, in your personality, in your purpose, in the way you communicate, in your attitude. Every part of your life, every part of who you are, you want to continually change. And that's what it means to be a Christian. None of us feel like we're at Christ level yet. But the more we get there, the better we can have an incredible atmosphere of love and a marriage that's truly delightful. It can be better, and it's supposed to be. It's not, think better or worse. Don't think, it's going to get worse. No, it's supposed to be better. And the longer you're married, the more you should learn. And you might be in one of those spots right now where you feel like, man, we're not doing that well. That doesn't mean you can't grow out of it. And I've seen people who have really, really struggling marriages grow into vibrant, exciting, really happy, joyful relationships. So the concept, of course, in marriage and in life is love. And many of you know these few words that I'm going to say right here, but it's important to understand that in marriage, the foundation, of course, is love. There's 4 Greek words that mean that are used for our one word of love, and I'll tell you those 4 words. One is S-T-O-R-G-E. This is family love. Another one is philia, P-H-I-L-I-A. That's where we get Philadelphia from. That's the friendship, the relational kind of love. Eros is the erotic, sensual love, and agape is the selfless love. And we're going to talk about all of those 4 kinds of love, not tonight, but we're going to talk about all of those. All of these actually are used in the Bible except Eros, although there's plenty of obvious things that are very sexual in nature, very romantic in nature in the Scriptures, and we'll talk about those when we get to that point. But all 4 of these are required to have a great marriage. If you don't have the philia love, or the eros love, or the storge love, and or the agape love, all 4 of them are critical. And so if you want a great marriage, you got to learn how to develop all of those qualities. And Romans 12 is, again, eros is not used in the Bible, but the other 3 are used only in this spot, in this short sequence. Now, agape is used throughout the Bible. Philia is used throughout the Bible, at least in the New Testament. But the storge is not. And so I'll show you this verse in Romans chapter 12, verse 9. It says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourself. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. This section is great. Many sermons could be preached here, but the love verse in verse 9 is agape. That's the selfless love. That's the sacrificial love. That's where you think of that other person as greater than you. And then the be devoted is actually a combination of words. It's the philia storge. They're both used together in one word. It's that devotion of the family. It's the devotion to each other. It's the devotion to friendship. And that's what is expected of people in the church. How much more so in the marriage? Marriage should be the classic thing of love. If you look at the Bible, one of the things that God compares his relationship to us with is marriage. And in multiple, in the Old and New Testament. So, and then honor one another above yourself. If you could do that first, this verse 9, 10, and right there all the time, it would be incredible, the kind of marriage that you would have. Agape is the foundation. And when you made that commitment to your husband or to your wife when you were married, you were basically telling them, I'm going to love you agape style all the rest of my days. Meaning above myself, selfless, serving, giving, unconditionally. Remember, you went through for better or for worse, for richer or poor. All those different kind of things you said, which meant I'm going to give you my very best of me for as long as I live. And then you did the same thing in baptism. You made the same kind of commitment when you said Jesus is Lord, that you're going to put him first above yourself all of your life. So I want to go to 1 John chapter 4, which I think is a really incredibly important section in the scriptures for marriage. And I use this really all the time when we do pre-marriage counseling. When Alice and I do this, this is one of the key verses we start out with. And it says this in verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Now he's again talking to people in the church, people who are Christians. But he's saying how much more important again is it in your marriage that you love one another? This is agape love. And then he says, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. God is agape. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and his only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. And skip down a little bit to verse 16 and a half. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. In this way, love is made complete among us, so that we may have confidence on the day of judgment. So, this concept of love is woven so much through the book of 1 John. But in this section, it tells us some really important things. It tells us love comes from God. Now, it says we're supposed to love one another, but love, the source of love, is God. And so when you think about that, one of the way God defines who he is agape. And so what does agape look like? And he gives you talks about this a little bit in here. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. He says, this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us. The point is that God initiated the love even when we didn't deserve it. That's agape. So sometimes you might be mad at your spouse, and you think, they don't really deserve my love, and maybe they don't. But if you love like God, they do. And you will love that way anyway, even if you don't feel like it, even if you don't feel like he or she deserves it. Your mindset is still to give love, to give selflessly. So it's initiating. And so I want you to think about that. In the home, and when you're together, or even when you're apart, who is the initiator of selflessness? Is that you? Would someone watch the way that you interacted with your spouse and said, this person is an initiating, selfless person? Because that should be us. That should be our goal. And since love comes from God, one of the really important things about this is if love comes from God, that means if I want to grow in my love, where's the best way to get it? To come from the source. To get close to Christ. Get closer and closer to him. If you think about If I want to become more selfless, I'm supposed to imitate Jesus. Think about what else? His unconditional love. Again, we didn't deserve it. Forgiving love. Colossians 3:13 talks about forgiving each other, including your spouse, in the same way that the Lord forgives you. How many times has the Lord had to forgive you? In the last day? In the last hour? But sometimes it gets hard. We feel like, man, I've forgiven him or her for this over and over again. But the mindset of agape is a mindset of godly forgiveness. This concept of forgiveness that keeps not letting it draw a line in your relationship. So if God is the source of this initiating, unconditional, selfless, forgiving love that we read about right in here, and we want to have a great marriage, that makes sense when Psalm 127:1 says this, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. If you wanted to do something amazingly great for your wife, amazingly great for your husband, you think of all the different gifts. I could get her this, or I could get her, Allison's got a special birthday coming up this year, and we're talking about different things she would like, and there's a lot of things that I would like to do for her, so we'll see what happens with that. But a better gift that you could give your spouse is this, is to fall more in love with God, to grow closer to the source of love. Because the closer you get to God, the more you're going to be like him. And the more you're like him, the more that you will have that selfless agape love. And if both of you do that together, it's unbelievable how successful marriages are. I really have never seen a marriage not make it where both people were living agape love. Never. All marriages go through challenges. But I've never seen a couple not make it through if they're both pursuing God with the agape mindset. So the best gift that I can give Allison is to grow closer to God every day, every morning, every part of my life. So how important is it to you? See, because when you don't work on your relationship with God, when you don't allow yourself to be changed by the resurrection, as we talked about Sunday, what happens is that you're not going to give in the way that you need to with your spouse. If you don't get closer to God, you're going to be further away and less likely to love. And so, how much effort do you put into that? Because remember, the best gift you can give to someone that you love is to learn how to agape love. There's no better gift. The best gift I can give to my kids, my parents, my friends, is to learn how to agape love. How much more in a marriage, if both of you can commit to saying, I'm going to grow closer to Christ, I'm going to become like him. Sometimes we make this mistake and we think that being a Christian or following Christ is going to church on Sunday, and it actually helps. But it's so much more than that. It's that pursuit of Christ. It's that willingness to change who you are as a disciple of or a follower of Christ to become like him. And the more you can do that, and the more your spouse can do that, the more fun you're going to have. Christianity doesn't get boring when you learn how to love. It gets greater in every area, whether it's the friendship part of love, whether it's the physical, sexual part of love, whether it's the emotional part of love. They all get better the closer you get to God. The closer you get to God, the stronger your marriage is going to be. So are you willing to work on that? And in the homework, it's going to talk a lot about that, is what are you really doing in your relationship with Christ? And right now, we're going through a different time. Many of you are home more than you're normally home. You're spending more time together, and how's that going? Is it smooth? You know, you have your way of doing things, and your spouse has their way of doing things. You might run into a little conflict. You might be really stressed. It might be totally different. You're not used to the same routines. And it's an opportunity to grow, actually, obviously, to learn more about each other. You can make it better. But challenges are going to happen. And again, if you don't rely and draw closer to Christ, you're going to really hurt your marriage relationship. Don't let this opportunity that you've got more time together than normal be lost. Imagine when you're younger and you say, man, I get more time with this person that I'm dating than I have been. You would be looking forward to it. You'd be so excited for it. Don't let the challenges in your marriage keep you from growing closer together. It's an important opportunity for each one of us to take. This should really be an opportunity for you to grow. All right, So I want you to think of this concept of the three, and we're going to look over in Ecclesiastes. Y'all have heard this before, but commonly used in marriages. But it's really true. And Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9 says this: Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And it's talking about the power of relationships. It could be marriage. It could be any relationship. It's just that closeness, how powerful it is to have a friend that you can count on. How powerful it is to be a friend that someone can count on you. And so this two are better than one concept is great. And it says in verse 12, though one may overpower, two can defend themselves. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. And so he adds this third strand in there because he's been talking about two all along. And the obvious extra strand is God. And so if you and your spouse can intertwine with God to make a tight cord, I really have never seen one get broken. I'm sure it's probably happened. But when people love God like this cord of three comes together. I know I'm talking about this a lot, but there's nothing better that you can do for your marriage, for your life, for your relationship with your children, is to draw closer to Christ. It's the best gift that you've got. God's given us this grace. Don't miss it. I want to talk about some practical things of how you can do some of this stuff. And I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 is talked about a lot, and we're going to talk about it some more. Because we need to. Verse 1. And now I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And sometimes when we get into our disagreements, we become resounding gongs and clanging cymbals. We're not listening to each other. We're thinking about how we're going to respond right away. And we're going to talk a lot about communication over the next few weeks. But really, even if I could eloquently express everything that I have to say, and people say, wow, he's so perfect the way he speaks or she speaks, without love, and just noise, especially in a marriage. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Again, I can have some great things. I can have great understanding, great faith, and without love, it doesn't make much difference, is what he's telling you. It's worth nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. So he's going into detail about these things and these qualities, and you think, man, what if somebody gives up their life? But I do it without love, it still doesn't work. So you, above all else, guys, pursue God so that you can grow in love. Now, here's some practicals. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast. Love is not proud. Love is not rude. Love is not self-seeking. Love is not easily angered, and love keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. And this is agape all the way through this. Now, when you read this, it's really important to understand that it's easy to focus on on the individual things, and we're going to do that a little bit in just a second. But really, all these words are really expressions of love. So let's say that I'm not very good in my patience. What that's really telling me is I'm not just impatient, but I have a love problem. That means I'm not as close. You could talk about being this great guy, loves, and is doing great spiritually. But if I'm impatient, I have a spiritual problem. I have a problem of love. I don't love like Jesus loved. Love is patient. If I have a kindness problem, it's really a love problem. I really need to learn how to love. And you can go through that and put all those problems. If you have a hard time being easily angered, yeah, you may be hot-tempered or whatever term you want to, and you say, well, that's just me. No, it might be you, but it's not God. And it's not okay. Love is not easily angered. If you feel like, man, I got this chart of what he did wrong all this past week, and every time they do this, I really, I just add to that chart and I keep adding that, meaning keeping a record of wrong. That's a lack of love. That's just not a problem on the side. That's not just one of these other things, well, I just have an envy problem. No, you have a love problem. It's just manifested itself in a lack of envy. In a presence of envy, or a lack of kindness, or wherever you want to use that. You just go through each one of these qualities. And so one of the things that I like people to do is to go through this and pick out an area where you feel like, wow, I really am struggling in this area. I'm really struggling in, let's say, being rude. I just get that sarcastic voice, and I have that tone of voice that just comes across and cuts. I'm really good at that. Let's say that's what you think, or really bad at it in one sense. And really, wouldn't it be great if you could take that away and replace it with love? And the answer is you can. Any of these qualities that you see in here that are really lacking, it's a love problem. And you can work on it. Again, going back to that same thing, God is love. Love comes from God. So if you want to get rid of that, you draw closer to God. But there's some things you can do in a practical sense too. What you can do is you can have this mindset where I'm going to work on my patience. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm deliberately going to do something about it. I'm not going to just let it be the way I am. It's interesting, that concept, when my children were dating people. And if they said, one of the things I told them to look for in people is, are they willing to change? Because if they're not willing to change, don't marry them. Because without that mindset, it's never going to grow. You're going to be stuck. Your marriage is capped right from the very beginning. But if you have a mindset that I can change, I can grow, I'm humble, I want input, that person, they can become an incredible spouse. So right now in your marriage, are you feeling like, this is just who I am? I just am impatient. I just can't stop keeping this record of wrongs. I can't, whatever other quality that you see. And you want to look at it and maybe even talk to your spouse and say, what do you see is my biggest weakness? One of the things we ask people to do is to write down in this list of qualities of love, which one is missing? Which one is the worst one? Which one's the challenging one? Write down your own first, and then write down your spouse's. It's great for communication. But what happens is after that you say, okay, what are we going to do this week to work on it? And you come up with a plan and you work on it. Obviously, the key is growing closer to God in love. However, you can deliberately make some attempts to work on patience and use it as a monitor. For me, one of the things in my life has been patience. And what I did is, I was, this was back when Keith was here with me, and I made this deal with Keith, is when I'm impatient, I'm going to call you up and tell you about it. Now, I didn't have to do that, but I knew that if I had to be held accountable like that, it would really be motivational. And I had to call him several times, but after time, that helped me. I went and studied out the word patience everywhere in the Bible. Impatience, being patient, every root of that word. And I looked up all of them that I could find. And again, it came back to that same thing over and over again. My problem isn't being impatient. It's manifested in impatience because I have a lack of love. I felt like I loved. I felt like I was good at loving. I'm not perfect. I get it. But obviously in that area, I really wasn't. And so I urge you to do that. I urge you to make a plan. What piece are you missing? Think of this list right here as a jigsaw puzzle. And when you take one of those pieces out, it stands out. It's this big, obvious thing. And so if you have the envy thing going on and it's not going into the love thing, then it's really obvious. And you need to be urgent about changing that. Do your husband a great favor this week. Maybe it's self-seeking. And you pick out that quality and say, I am going to devote myself to dealing with this, to loving instead of this. Talk to her, talk to him about it. Pray about it together. Get help from other people. But don't allow your marriage to keep staying the same. That's Satan's trap. Then you get bored. Then you start withdrawing from each other. Don't do that. Make every effort to strengthen your marriage. Another really practical thing, besides this 1 Corinthians 13, is there's the 5 love languages. Now, we talked about that with children last week, and the reason I use it a lot is because I think it really is good. The 5 love languages comes from Chapman's book, and this first one, there's a list, and one is words of affirmation. That's encouraging and strengthening and saying positive things, not made up. But the truth is, catching your partner doing good things, telling them how much you appreciate that. Allison worked really hard today. She was out there digging around in the dirt, doing all this stuff, and she really was trying to clean up this thing. And she did a great job, worked really hard. I wanted to make sure that she knew that. Man, that was great. And it was really, it really looked nice that she put all that work into it. That's words of affirmation. Physical touch. Physical touch is to hug. It's a physical affection. It's holding hands. It's kissing. It can be sexual in the marriage. It's just that physical touch. So we need that in our relationship. Quality time. It's spending time especially with people, with your spouse. Not just sitting with TV. It's quality time. Not just sitting on your cell phone. Or not sitting on your cell phone, sitting down and playing with your cell phone. Not just going to bed, okay, we're going to hang out together, and you sit on the cell phone. That doesn't work. That's not quality time. That doesn't enhance your relationship. And if your spouse it's really important to him or her, the quality time, they'll feel ignored. They'll feel rejected from that. The same with physical touch. The same with words of affirmation. If you don't give that encouragement, if you're not touching each other and holding each other. Gifts. Acts of service are the other ones. And so it's interesting because most of us are a little bit different in those. Some people are, the same, both of them. That's pretty unusual. One person will be usually gifts. One person will be quality time. There's different things. So your natural tendency is if it's works of service, acts of service, is for you to give acts of service to your spouse. But they may really be wanting physical touch. But you're trying hard to love him or her and vice versa, and they're trying to love him or her, and it doesn't work. So you have to communicate this. So you have to think about what is it that's really important to you, and what is it that's really important to your spouse. Think about their needs and how they respond. Because if you can learn to give them their love language more effectively, they will feel much more loved. So what I encourage you to do is to take the top 2. So you write down, okay, these 2 are my top 2. Now, all 5 of them are nice, but there's probably 2 that make you feel especially loved. Or another way to look at it, what happens if you didn't have those 2 for a period of time? That's how you can kind of pick out what really is important to you, what really matters. And you want to know this about your spouse. And guys, in a selfless marriage, you're going to meet those 2 needs. If you have agape love, you're going to think, you're trying to learn the love language of that person so you can speak to them in a loving way. And so the more you can listen and the more you can learn and the more you can communicate, your spouse will feel so much more love if you speak in their language is the concept of this. So in every part of your marriage, love is a piece of it. And if you can grow stronger, create this atmosphere of love, you can have an amazing marriage. So that's what this homework is about. And I'm just going to kind of go through it for you briefly, and then I'm going to leave you with it and work on it. I really encourage you, though, to go through your homework early in the week. Don't wait till the end of the week, because a lot of this is discussion that you can have each night, each afternoon, when you get a chance to sit down and talk to each other after you put the kids to bed or whatever chores you get them all done and talk to each other. So to create an atmosphere of love, there's a couple things you can do in this. Look at 1 Corinthians 13, make a plan, pray about it together, and also have an idea each morning when you wake up. Okay, let's say my spouse's love language is quality time and acts of service. Figure out that morning how you're going to meet those needs that day. How are you going to speak to her in a way that she's going to feel like, my husband, or she's going to feel like, vice versa, that they're both going to feel like, man, this person loves me. They care about me. They're thinking about me. What takes away from the atmosphere of love? Your tone of voice, your cell phone, your TV, social media, so many other things that you know in your life. Be wise. Don't let anything take the place of agape love with your spouse. The core of 3, pursue your walk with God. Study and pray every day. One of the things that I really love hearing is what she learns each day. She'll tell me, oh, I learned this, or I studied this, and she's great. She has great insight. Really helps me. But really have a way that you can communicate what you're learning, pray together, share with each other. The more that you can do that, the closer you feel. God will bring you closer together, not further apart. And this last one is discussion questions. There's a whole bunch of them there. But it really requires you to be honest with each other. And if you want to grow, you have to be honest with each other. But remember, don't punish your spouse for telling you the truth. If you say, what area do I need to work in? And she tells you, then if you withdraw from her, if you treat her rude, you're basically telling her, I don't really want to know that information. So make sure that you listen when you ask these questions, because hopefully you want to grow. Hopefully you want to get better. Hopefully you want to change. Because by changing to become more like Christ, it will be an amazing thing for you. This last thing on there is growth group follow-up for discussion. And we're not setting up growth groups to do this right now, but what we would really strongly encourage you to do is talk to another couple about what you're learning, about what's challenging you. The more you can incorporate that advice, that accountability with each other, it really will enhance your ability to grow in your marriage. So guys, I hope this is helpful to get you started. Again, I want to reiterate the most important thing about this is to grow closer to Christ. Do not let anything get in the way of that happening. And there's so many distractions. There's so many other things that have to be done, but they're not more important than growing closer to God for your own salvation, for your family, but especially in your marriage. Don't miss the opportunity to grow together in love. Thanks so much for your attention. Have an amazing week, and we'll be talking about communication for the next few weeks after this. Look forward to talking to you.